Al Capone was a famous mobster from the late 1920s to early 1930s who was known for how he ran the mob and controlled a pretty good portion of Chicago. Let's start at the beginning. Capone was originally from Italy, where he was born in 1899, with his full name being Alphonse Capone, but his family moved to Brooklyn, New York with his 8 siblings. Unfortunately, with how rampant crime was at the time, Capone became a pretty big criminal at a young age, joining that gang at only 12. It's also pretty noteworthy that Italians were discriminated against pretty heavily. Capone ended up knowing Johnny Torrio because Torrio was the boss of a number of gambling operations, and Capone did errands for him. And even though Torrio moved to Chicago, they still were in close contact with each other. Right around this time, Prohibition started, which prohibited the manufacture and sale of alcohol. But even though most of the country was in support of Prohibition, it seemed like almost everyone ignored the law and got their own alcohol. So with Capone and Torrio still in contact, Capone was invited to Chicago to join the Chicago outfits run by Big Jim. Big Jim has an enemy called Muggs. Muggs ended up hiring a hitman to kill Big Jim. They were successful as he was killed in his own restaurant. This incident left Torrio and Capone in charge of the mob. A little while later, Torrio got shot 4 times in the chest, but he still lived. After he recovered, he moved back to New York, leaving Capone with all of the power. Capone was now the leader, which made him do some things that were much more controversial. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre was probably the most controversial thing that has happened, as 7 members of the Irish gang were invited and promised alcohol but were lined up against the wall and shot. The pressure of the people on President Hoover to repeal the Prohibition Act was powerful, but as a strong prohibitionist himself, he did not repeal it, making him ever more unpopular. The law itself became even more hated as the Great Depression hit, as people believed that legalizing alcohol would get people more jobs, but nothing was changed. Capone was finally caught and arrested for tax evasion. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison and $250,000, which is the most time someone has ever spent in jail for tax evasion. He was put into Alcatraz on October 18, 1931. By the time he had gotten out of jail, Prohibition had ended. People were raving. Capone ended up moving to the Florida Keys with his family, where he spent the rest of his life. Capone ended up dying from a stroke on January 25, 1947. Although Capone was known as a fierce leader, he was actually a very compassionate guy, as he owned many soup kitchens during the Great Depression. Capone was also regarded as a great family man, as the kids loved him.